Hi, this is Pastor Aaron coming to you from Alma Alliance Church, where I'm going to be sharing with you the third of 7 reflections on the 7 last sayings of Jesus Christ from the cross as we prepare our hearts and our lives for the Easter celebration that is coming this Sunday when we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But of course, there can be no resurrection, there can be no rising from the dead without the crucifixion, the death of Jesus Christ on the cross for the sin of all humanity. A couple of days ago, as I shared with you about the first saying of Jesus Christ, it would seem as if by the time Jesus reaches the hill of Calvary to be crucified, he is totally and completely alone. The crowds who had sung his praises and shouted forth his glory, declaring him to be the Savior, the Messiah, the King of Kings, and the Lord of Lords, have largely abandoned him. And not only abandoned him, they have turned on him. They have become his accusers, shouting, "Crucify him." They have become the ones who have mocked him as he has made his way from his trial and his condemnation to the hill of his crucifixion. Of his closest friends, virtually all of them have slunk away into the silence of the shadows. Judas has betrayed him. Peter has denied him 3 times. And it would seem as if Jesus is totally and completely alone. But there is still a small remnant, a crowd that is gathered at the foot of the cross, a few that have remained faithful to him to the very end, who have walked with him through his arrest, through his trial, his condemnation, and all the way to the foot of the cross itself, where they stand as witnesses to his death. Among those who are gathered in the crowd are Mary, the mother of Jesus, whose heart for sure is breaking at what she is witnessing, whose mind is recalling the words of the blessing when he was born, that a sword would pierce her heart on account of her son. And this is that moment. And along with Mary, there are a few other women who were close companions of her and of Jesus during his ministry. And there is one disciple, the disciple John. John, who throughout his gospel describes himself as the beloved disciple, not to elevate himself somehow above the other disciples as if he was more loved by Jesus, but simply as a reflection of his heart for his Lord. That John defines himself as a man who loved Jesus as a brother, as a friend, and as his Lord and Savior. John is there at the foot of the cross, and that shouldn't surprise us. John has walked closely with Jesus all the way in both close physical proximity. He's been one of the central 3 of Jesus' disciples, and he's been emotionally connected to Jesus in a way that none of the others really were. And as John tells the story, which only John could tell in his gospel, of this saying of Jesus to this crowd of faithful followers who are gathered at his feet as he breathes his last breath. This is John's testimony. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, the disciple took her into his home. It's a very touching, moving, personal scene in which Jesus is aware of the broken heart of his mother who is at his feet. He is aware that as the eldest son, it is his responsibility to provide care for his mother as she advances in age, and that he will be unable to provide that because of his own early death. And he looks at her and he looks at this disciple who has been faithful to him to the very end. And he gives them both this responsibility, this blessing, this charge to be mother and son for each other, to care for each other, to provide for each other. Jesus meets Mary in the hour of her grief and in the hour of his suffering, and he shows his care and his compassion for her. Not just for her eternal soul that he's providing for through his death on the cross, that she too will be in eternity with him forever on account of her faith, but also for her physical life here on earth, that she still needs to be cared for, she still needs to be provided for, she still needs to be protected. And here is his friend, whom Jesus gives this sacred responsibility to be that person for his own mother. And John takes that responsibility very seriously and brings her home as his own family to provide for her and to protect her and to meet all of her earthly needs. And undoubtedly also to be spiritually a leader for her. It's interesting during this time that we are living in right now to think of these words. Many of us are suffering. We've lost jobs. We've lost income. We've lost some of our sense of purpose, as many people have been sent home from their workplaces, their places that define much of their lives, and they're wondering, who am I? What am I supposed to do when I don't have to do the things that I feel passionate about any longer? Even more so, many have become sick because of this virus that we are all wrestling with. Many have lost loved ones. We have become well acquainted with the reality of uncontrollable suffering that is lurking behind every corner of our world. Mary knew very well what it meant to suffer, what it meant to lose someone whom she deeply loved, and yet Jesus was present to her. Even though he himself was suffering, he was still aware enough of her to provide for her and to meet her needs. But what's really, really, I think, special about this moment is that he provides for her need through another person. That he brings these two people together to share with one another in the midst of their grief and to support one another in the days, weeks, months, years, lifetimes that are ahead. And with those thoughts in mind, I want to give us really one blessing and one challenge. The blessing is this, that as Jesus looks upon his mother as he is suffering and she is suffering in her moment of great need and grief and sorrow, I think there's a message to all of us that Jesus is with us in this moment too. Whatever we may be going through, whether it has something to do with this virus that all of us are facing together, or whether there is something more deep and personal going on in your life, Jesus is one who is acquainted with suffering. He knows sorrow. He knows what it means to grieve. Everything that we experience as loss on earth, Jesus himself has experienced. And he is with us in our pain and in our sorrow and in our suffering. He is not a stranger to us. He sees us and he provides for us and he cares for us even in the midst of these things. And my prayer is that all of you may know that this Easter, that there is a God who looks on you in your grief and in your sorrow and in your pain, and he loves you and he wants to provide for you and care for you even in the midst of that. That's the blessing. The challenge is this. Jesus called John to step out of his comfort zone and to play a role that he'd never played before. To provide for this elderly woman in her time of need. That Jesus' care and compassion for his mother was expressed through a different human being whom he brought into her life. And I think that is the challenge for each and every one of us, that God is knitting together in the church a new community that is not defined by blood, by relations, by lineages, but is instead defined by people who are going to faithfully step out and care for one another. That we are literally to be brothers and sisters, mothers and sons, fathers and daughters to those whom God has entrusted us with as our neighbors, as our friends, that they are to be our family, and that we are to care for one another in the same way that we would care for our own family. And so I want you to look around during this week of Easter and in the weeks and months that are ahead as we continue to go through these trials where there is going to be great human need. How can we, the church, meet the need and be the family of God to those around us? So I am new to this whole new realm of technology, of YouTube broadcasting and all of this sort of thing, and it seems that I have unwittingly and not maliciously run afoul of copyright laws. And so from now on, instead of having the worship portion of the video, the song as part of the video, I'm going to link to it in the description below the video on YouTube here. And I encourage you to click on that link and visit those sites. And but pay attention to the video. Use that time as a time of personal reflection to enter into the story of Easter, the story of the week of the Passion of Jesus Christ, and may that be a blessing to you. I will also include down below some discussion questions that you can use as either a time of personal devotion, or you can use it with your family, your friends, or even with an online community as some questions for discussions, some small group discussion questions. So thank you for your patience and for spending some time with me this morning. And I look forward to seeing you again tonight for the fourth reflection on the 7 last words of Jesus Christ from the cross.